Mob Psycho 100 Season 1 set just about as high a bar for anime openings as any one show could conceivably hope to set. Stuffed end to end with dozens of manga references and packaged together with gorgeous experimental animation, clever credit placement, and a phenomenal original theme song encapsulating the themes of the series, it epitomized just about everything that I look for in an OP. The anime dropped when I was in the middle of working on a list of the 10 greatest anime openings of all time, and as a result, I had to delay and rework that entire video just to give Mob the second place finish it rightly deserved. Honestly, I didn't expect the opening for Season 2 to come anywhere near living up to its predecessor. That's not to say that I expected it to be bad. If it was half as good, it still would have been one of the best of the year, but that first OP really felt like lightning in a bottle. Before the show aired, the idea that director Yuzuru Tachikawa and Bones could match it, let alone top it with their second opening, seemed absolutely ludicrous to me. But that was 3 months ago, and now, here we are. If 99 by Mob Choir was a near-perfect opening, then true to its name, 99.9 is even more near-perfecter. I am a little hesitant to say that it's the best anime opening in history, only because golly, that sounds pretty hyperbolic, doesn't it? But speaking as someone who spends about a week every year doing literally nothing but watching anime openings to narrow down a top 10, I've never seen one that's impressed me more. So today, we're breaking down all the references, the tributes, and everything else that makes this OP special in order to justify my admittedly lofty claim that this is indeed the greatest anime opening ever made, open bracket, not clickbait, closed bracket. That will involve spoilers for the second season of the anime, so if you haven't seen it yet, now's a great time to binge the whole thing through this video's sponsor, Crunchyroll. Now, without further ado, let's dive into this OP. In time with a killer bass riff, flashing spotlights reveal to us a CGI model of the show's core cast as toy figures in a strange, stacked diorama. The model starts spinning, colorful lights start flashing, and all of a sudden the whole thing comes alive, with Reagan throwing salt at the evil spirits around the bottom, Ritsu jumping over Mob's karate chops and across his outstretched palms in the middle, and Dimple just sorta spinning around doing his own thing in the air at the top. All the while, in the center, the impressively bewigged head of Teruki bobs up and down. This is a zoetrope, an early form of animation that actually predates film. Zoetropes create the illusion of movement by syncing the rotation of a physical model, or more commonly a cylinder covered with images, with flashing lights, so that your brain registers the individual frames or models as a single continuous image. Both Disneyland and the Ghibli Museum have their own 3D zoetropes, much like this one, which they use to illustrate the fundamental principles of animation to children, and also curious adults. Of course, as this is a computer-generated animation and they could have just animated the characters independently, they didn't actually have to make a model that would work for the illusion, but they did anyway. If you were to 3D print this sculpture out and correctly spin it around, it would actually animate, which is pretty darn impressive attention to detail. And on that note, if anyone out there has the time and knowledge to make a replica of this model, I will pay you a lot of real money for it. Interestingly, the next shot we see, a Rubik's Cube comprised of our heroes' faces, wouldn't actually translate to real life. The problem is that there are only 5 character faces to fill the 6 faces of the cube, and you can see, if you slow it down, that the animator's solution to this problem was to just give the cube 2 blue Reagan faces. Interesting that they'd cheat here and not with the zoetrope, but shortcuts aside, what does this shot mean? Solving Rubik's Cubes blindfolded is a party trick used by some psychic scammers to convince onlookers of their powers, and in that sense it fits with the show's themes and the OP's motif of illusions and showmanship. But beyond that, one of the most prominent narrative themes in this season is the idea that Mob was only able to become the great guy that he is because he was lucky enough to have good friends. And I think that this mixing up of Mob and Reagan's faces with those of all their friends is meant to symbolize the role that they've all played in shaping each other's identities. That idea is reinforced as we pull back from Reagan's face to see a slew of symbols representing their connections to other people. The flower that sprouts from Mob's head when his memories of his friends and family return in Mogami's nightmare world, Minori's teddy bear, a camera from Reagan's press conference, the logo on Sho's jacket, the big broccoli from the final fight with Toichiro, Serizawa's umbrella, Mob's favorite amu rice made by his mom presumably, the takoyaki that Reagan Reagan burned his tongue on, the cocktail shaker from Reagan's favorite bar, and Banshomaru Shinra's wooden bead necklace. Interacting with all of these people has played a part in shaping who Mob is today. Following that, we see a barrier grid or picket fence animation of our main cast dancing along to the music. This animation technique, which evolved alongside early film cameras in the 1890s, uses precisely spaced out slit patterns on a sliding top layer to create the illusion of repetitive motion on the paper below. A credit for character designer Yoshimichi Kameda appears below the cast as the slits go by, and fittingly, when the pattern passes off screen, it leaves behind his now fully animated character designs. Our heroes strike a pose and unleash a flash of psychic energy that brings us to one of the two most impressive sequences in this opening. Almost every single supporting character in the entire season falls backwards in a human domino chain that passes under a neon UFO sign, featuring credits for the show's director of photography and editor, before colliding with Mob, slingshotting him through a bizarre speaker contraption, also displaying credits, this time for the show's sound team, and into a massive ball of buildings. If you've seen the season finale, I probably don't have to explain what the ball of buildings is. Mob tries to use them to crush Claw's boss in their big climactic showdown, only to have the tables turned on him when Toichiro flies out of the rubble and sends Mob crashing through the concrete sphere instead. The Ferris wheels, with Sho and Serizawa's heads on them, are there because they're the only other psychics who clash with Toichiro, their mutual father figure, directly. The domino chain, then, would represent how all of Mob's interactions with others have helped him build up the emotional energy that he needed for that battle. It's no coincidence that the final person to fall and set him off is the person closest to his heart, his beloved Tsubomi. I can't think of a reason why the Telepathy Club, his family, and the Psychic Research Kids would show up in the chain twice, except maybe that they needed to save a bit on animation. And considering how much went into this shot, it's absolutely acceptable for them to take that small shortcut. Every single character in this sequence has a unique animation as they realize they're falling that represents their personality perfectly, from Reagan's exaggerated panic to the Body Improvement Bros' stoic smiles to, best of all, in my opinion, Dimple's shit-eating grin as he floats above the falling crowd unharmed. And that attention to detail doesn't just stop with the characters, there's also a metric ton of symbolic references flying around in the background behind them. Honestly, there are way too many of them for me to explain in depth, so let's just fire through the lot of them lightning round style. In order of appearance, we see an eraser that Mob levitated in front of his class when he was a kid, the big broccoli again, the dog that he levitated for Tsubomi, Serizawa's umbrella, a sign with the face of the manga's author 1 breaking through a wall, an ant from outside the tunnel with the biker ghosts, a bending spoon, the human-faced dog, Shinra's bead necklace, the press conference camera, the H logo from the sweater of Sho's lackey, the tomato plant from Reagan's office, what looks like President Kirin's mouth, the sign for Reagan's favorite bar, and hey, speaking of Reagan, he has a One Punch Man wallpaper on his phone. That's a neat reference. The car flying behind him is from the big fight with Claw, the moth is one of the forms that Mogami took to spy on Mob in his dream, the UFO represents the ultimate goal of the Telepathy Club, there's Minori's teddy bear again, and the frog is another thing that Mob levitated in order to impress Tsubomi when he was a kid. Whew, yep, that sure is a lot of references, and I wouldn't have been able to catch all of them without some very kind folks helping to jog my memory on Twitter and Discord, so thank you all for that. Anyway, after that cavalcade of references, we see a kaleidoscopic collage that reuses many of them. Kaleidoscopes, if you look at them a certain way, are another early example of animation, since they refract light in order to create an impression of motion that's not really happening. And this animated property of kaleidoscopes is applied to make the flapping lips look as though they're singing along with the music in this shot. Personally, though, I think the coolest effect we see here is the way the credits for the series' art director and color designer form together out of the visual chaos, which it's their job to make sense of. None of this credit integration is organic per se, since everything that we're seeing is very abstract, but all of these credits are tied to the imagery thematically, and they all feel like an integral part of the sequence instead of just something that was tacked on as an afterthought. The same applies to the credit of composer Kenji Kawai that emerges from the psychedelic pattern behind the Telepathy Club and psychic research subjects as they all do the wave in time with the music. In a way, even this dance move is an animation reference, as the intent of the wave is to create the illusion that some force is moving through a group of people when in fact they're just wiggling their arms in a weird way. The kaleidoscopic imagery continues behind the credit for 99.9 as infinite mirrored images of the Body Improvement Club engage in synchronized exercise. This represents the club's dedication to their daily regimen. No matter how repetitive or strenuous it gets, anime's best bros hit the gym every single day. And it's only fitting that they show this under a credit for one of the best workout jams ever released by Japan. Pulling back from that song credit, we see Mob's face pulled apart into its composite color, shading, and line art layers in 3 dimensions. This impressive effect serves as an object lesson in how anime visuals are put together, but it also has a deeper narrative meaning that comes into play as Mob's face is pulled back together and he sinks, seemingly unconscious, into a violent, sketchy cloud of energy that comes together to form an ominous, evil-looking face. I believe that this shot represents the breakdown of Mob's sense of identity that happens when he projects himself into Minori's mind to fight Mogami and ends up trapped in a false life with no memories for months on end. Mob falling into the cloud then would represent how close he comes to being swallowed up by Mogami's unrelenting rage. Now, this could also be a reference to something that happens toward the very end of the manga. If you've read it, you can probably guess what I'm talking about, but since most of you haven't, I will say no more. Following this, we're introduced to Claw's elite members as they rotate dramatically around its logo, and in a flash, their leader, Toichiro Suzuki, appears in the center. This shot calls back to the zoetrope from the start of the OP with its circular movement and the repeated flashing of Toichiro's face, but unlike that model, this image is totally static. This reflects the fact that, unlike our heroes, Toichiro and his subordinates, isolated by their delusion that they are special, are not moving forward in their lives. Putting that symbolic meaning aside though, when you look at all of these shots collectively, it becomes clear that this opening was meant to be as much a tribute to animation as a whole as it is a tribute to Mob. It gives us a tour through the history of illusory movement, from kaleidoscopes to zoetropes, that culminates with a layered breakdown of the very process used to create this anime. And if you think about it, that makes a hell of a statement. Essentially, what this opening is saying in its first half is what you're about to see is what all of this history has been building up to, which would come off as absurdly self-important if they didn't immediately deliver on it. What follows the shot of Claw is 20 straight seconds of pure, uninterrupted film-grade fight sakuga. There's not much to explain here story-wise. These are fairly direct depictions of fights that happen in the final arc of the season between Claw's elites and our psychic heroes. But the expertise in craft behind these shots cannot be understated. Animated by, according to Sakugaboru, Hideki Kakita, Nobuaki Nagano, and Yoshimichi Kameda, this sequence impresses with almost literally every frame. Every character fights exactly how they should, and their personalities come across in every frame in how they move. From the way Ryo's teleportation ability is used to facilitate a scene change, to Dimple's wonderful expressions as he dodges the vines with Ritsu, there are a ton of remarkable details in these fights that you will only ever notice if you play them back frame by frame. At the same time, it looks so good in motion that you just don't want to slow it down. I mean, even ignoring the brilliant credit placement, this shot of Sakurai preparing to cut down the oil tanker as it flies toward the skyscraper just looks amazing. And the 3D rotation around the resulting explosion makes my jaw drop to the floor every time I see it. That shot is made all the more impressive by the fact that that background isn't CGI. It's footage of a real city, presumably shot with a drone, and run through several filters to make it look like a monochromatic sketch. And the simple fact that these backgrounds don't look like absolute ass, as photo filter backgrounds in anime so often do, is an achievement in itself, but that it blends so seamlessly with the monochromatic characters fighting in it, not in front of it, in it. It really feels like they are physically occupying the same space as this footage is almost miraculous. It's not 100% flawless. They use a digital zoom on noticeably low-res background art when Sho is leaping to attack his father that looks kinda bad for a few frames when you slow it down, but even with a few small shortcuts here and there, I can't even begin to imagine how difficult it must have been to conceptualize and execute on this whole fight scene. It is a triumph of animation, every bit as impressive as the fights it represents in the show itself, which, if you've seen them, you know is saying a hell of a lot. As we zoom in on Best Boy Serizawa and Toichiro, we can see a bird's eye view of the entire city framed in the Claw Boss's mind's eye. This is a clear representation of his megalomaniacal worldview, but his perception of the world as a plaything that it's his right as life's protagonist to destroy doesn't go unchallenged. A massive explosion within the city is cut short as the rubble is psychically knit back together. A shield at the center of the destruction bursts, unleashing a wave of psychic energy that begins tearing the ground apart once more, but at the center we see Mob, confidently protecting his friends from harm. With the situation under control, he returns to his normal calm and quiet demeanor, leading into the final shots of the OP. But before we get to those, let's take a few seconds to really consider this one. In its framing and animation style, the shot is obviously meant to call back to the last shot of the first OP, which showed unknown % Mob tearing apart the city with his immense powers. Now, instead of destroying the world, Mob is helping to protect it and keep it together. And he's able to do that because, instead of standing alone, he has all of his friends behind him. The contrast between these two shots highlights how much Mob has grown as a person over these last 2 seasons, and how important his friends are to that growth. At the end of the shot, Mob is enveloped in a transparent cube which transforms into letters that initially spell out Mob Psycho 100 before shifting into the theme song's core message, "Your life is your own." Those letters reform once again into the title card, and behind it appears the zoetrope from the start of the OP once more. In short order, the spinning model slows to a halt, with 3D credits for the various companies that worked on the anime appearing in front of it, then the lights around it blink out one by one, returning everything to darkness. This effectively turns the whole opening into a closed loop, just like the first OP. And as was the case there, this whole OP is masterfully crafted from the start of that loop to the end. The animation is consistently top tier, almost every shot serves double duty as an homage of some sort and a symbolic reflection of the anime's characters and story. The credits are all integrated in fun, imaginative ways that often reflect the work done by those named in them, and while it works perfectly well as a standalone opening, it also builds on the ideas and motifs established in the first OP to create an additional layer of meaning for those who've seen it, making it, in my eyes, a perfect opening for a sequel as well. Also, did I mention that 99.9 kicks all kinds of ass? Because gosh dang, if there's one anime original band that I wish would make their own independent albums, it's Mob Choir. Both of the themes that they performed so far for the show rank among my favorite songs ever, and it's gonna hurt waiting for season 3 just so I can hear another one. Most importantly though, when you pull away from all of its great individual components to look at this opening as a whole, you see that it's a fantastic reflection of everything that Mob Psycho 100 is about. It's fun, colorful, and goofy, but also intense and action-packed, and it keeps those two sides of its identity well balanced against each other. It's an OP that tells you exactly what the show that follows has in store for you, and frames it in the most exciting and enticing manner that I can imagine. I've said before that Mob Psycho 100 represents basically everything that I've ever wanted to see in a single anime, and it's only fitting, in light of that this second credit sequence is basically everything that an anime opening should be. If you've watched this far into the video, chances are you're a pretty big fan of Mob Psycho 100, and if that's the case, you might be interested to know that the show's director and character designer, as well as Mob's voice actor, are all going to be guests at this year's Crunchyroll Expo, running from August 30th to September 1st at the San Jose Convention Center. You can click the link in the doobly-doo to find out more about CRX and buy tickets to the show, and while you're buying them, you can enter the promo code BASEMENT when you check out for $5 off your order. And of course, if you made it through this and you somehow haven't seen Mob Psycho 100 yet, you can watch the whole thing and hundreds of other great anime with new ones streaming as they air in Japan, only on Crunchyroll. Let me know in the comments below what other anime openings you'd like to see me cover, and what upcoming anime from the spring season you're most excited to watch. And while you're down there, don't forget to subscribe for more videos every week. Or if you can't wait, you can click the link on screen right now to go watch my analysis of the groundbreaking opening to the anime classic Shrek. I'm Geoff Thew, professional shitbag, signing out from my mother's basement.